In the early 1980s, 4 Iowa-class fast battleships originally built during World War II, Iowa, Missouri, New Jersey and Wisconsin, were taken out of mothballs and returned to active duty. Nearly 900 feet long and displacing close to 60,000 tons, the battle wagons could fire a 9-gun broadside, sending 18 tons of steel and explosives hurtling towards their targets. The battleships were modernized to include cruise missiles, ship-killing missiles and phalanx point defense guns. Returned to the fleet, the ships saw action off the coasts of Lebanon and Iraq. At the end of the Cold War, the battleships were retired again. All were slated to become museums. Few knew, however, that returning the battleships to service in the 80s had been only part of the plan. The second, more ambitious phase was a radical redesign of the massive warships that would have combined the attributes of battleships and aircraft carriers. The resulting ship, a Battlecarrier, was merely one of many schemes over the span of 30 years to modernize the most powerful American battleships ever built. The various proposals, all of them nixed, had the World War II-era ships carrying hundreds of U.S. Marines or launching Harrier jump jets or even firing atomic projectiles. A hole in the Navy. Before World War II, planners had assumed that the big gun ships would win wars by duking it out with enemy vessels of the same kind. Pearl Harbor and the Battle of Midway dispelled that notion, as the flexibility and long-range striking power of aircraft carriers proved superior to battleships' broadsides. The battle wagons were relegated to a secondary role in the fleet, shelling shore defenses ahead of landings by the Army and Marines. And after the war, the Navy shed most of its heavy cruisers and battleships while retaining its aircraft carriers. The rush to embrace missiles further reduced the influence of the big gun vessels, and the era of the battleship appeared to be over for good. For the U.S. Marine Corps, this was a worrying trend. The seaborne invasion of Incheon during the Korean War showed that the age of amphibious assaults was not yet over. Military planners liked aircraft for their flexibility, but from the Marines' perspective, a ship that could sit off a coastline and bombard it with heavy guns for hours on end was vital. There was a solution. The 4 Iowa-class battleships, in mothballs since World War II, were briefly reactivated during the Korean War to provide gunfire support for UN forces, and retired again after the war was over. For some Navy planners, battleships were back in vogue. There were frequent attempts to return the battle wagons to service. Nuclear battleship. In 1958, the Navy proposed overhauling the Iowa-class ships by removing all of the 16-inch guns and replacing them with anti-aircraft and anti-submarine missiles. The new guided missile battleships would also carry 4 Regulus II cruise missiles, each of which could flatten a city 1,000 miles distant with a nuclear warhead more than 100 times as powerful as the bomb used on Hiroshima. The result would have certainly been the most powerful battleship ever, but the concept was riddled with inefficiencies. Under the proposal, 2,000 sailors would have had to sail into hostile waters in an expensive, 900-foot vessel to attack just 4 targets with nuclear weapons. An Air Force bomber could attack as many targets, at a greater range, with fewer than a dozen crew. And at $1.5 billion in today's dollars, the conversion would have been expensive. At the same time, the Navy had put in orders for submarines to carry Polaris ballistic missiles. The proposed missile submarines could attack targets more than twice as far away as the Regulus II armed battleship could, while carrying 4 times as many missiles and spending most of their time underwater avoiding detection.